The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in every direction, nothing but sand and scrub brush for miles. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her hand against her swollen belly as another contraction rippled through her. She shouldn't have been out here alone at 7 months pregnant, but the geological readings were impossible to ignore, massive energy signatures coming from absolutely nowhere. Then she saw it. A town, complete with white picket fences, children playing in yards, and smoke rising from chimneys. A town that existed in the middle of nowhere, yet appeared on no satellite imagery, no government survey, no map ever created. Within hours of her discovery, black SUVs surrounded her research camp. Men, in suits with cold eyes and government badges, told her she'd never been here, never seen anything, that her unborn daughter's future depended on her silence. But Sarah wasn't just any geologist. She was former military intelligence, and she recognized a cover-up when she saw one. What kind of experiment requires an entire fake town? And why did every resident she glimpsed look exactly the same age they would have been 30 years ago? The lead agent, a gaunt man who introduced himself only as Morrison, stood beside her equipment trailer as his team dismantled her seismic monitors. "Dr. Chen, you've wandered into a restricted military zone. I'm sure you understand the implications." Sarah kept her expression neutral, drawing on years of interrogation training. "I checked all restricted airspace and ground coordinates before setting up my survey. This location showed no classifications. Classifications change." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes retroactively, she watched them work, noting how they handled her equipment with suspicious familiarity. These weren't standard government agents. They knew exactly what each instrument was for, disconnecting cables in precise order to avoid data corruption. Military, but specialized. Scientific division, probably. "The town," she said casually. "Interesting atmospheric phenomenon. Heat mirage, I assume?" Morrison's pause lasted a fraction too long. "There is no town, Doctor." But there was, and they both knew it. Sarah had gotten close enough to see details that couldn't be explained by hallucination or desert mirages. The children playing in the yard weren't quite right, their movements too synchronized, their ages too uniformly distributed. And the adults she'd glimpsed through windows had triggered something in her memory, faces that seemed familiar yet impossible. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. She breathed through it, maintaining eye contact with Morrison. "I need to get back to Vegas. Prenatal appointment." "Of course." He gestured to one of his men. "Agent Davies will escort you to ensure you don't get lost again." The threat was polite, but unmistakable. Sarah nodded and climbed into a truck, starting the engine while Davies slid into a black sedan behind her. As she pulled away from her research site, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Morrison speaking rapidly into a satellite phone. The drive back to Vegas gave her time to think. The energy readings had been off the charts, not geological in nature, but something else entirely. Electromagnetic, possibly, or some kind of exotic radiation she'd never encountered. The signatures suggested massive power consumption, the kind needed for industrial-level operations or advanced research facilities. But it was the faces that bothered her most. In her brief glimpse through the town's windows, she'd seen a woman who looked exactly like Dr. Elena Vasquez, her former colleague from the Army's Remote Sensing Division. Elena had died in a classified incident in 1994. Sarah had attended the funeral. Yet the woman in the window appeared exactly as Elena had 30 years ago, not a day older. Her daughter kicked suddenly, a sharp jab against her ribs that made Sarah gasp. The baby had been unusually active since she'd approached the town, as if responding to some stimuli Sarah couldn't detect. She rubbed her belly absently, mind racing through possibilities. Preservation experiment? Some kind of temporal research? The military had been exploring exotic physics applications for decades, most classified beyond her former clearance level. But an entire town of people who shouldn't exist, powered by unknown energy sources in the middle of nowhere. That suggested something far beyond conventional science. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, "Some stones are better left unturned." "For your daughter's sake." Sarah deleted the message and kept driving, but her hands trembled slightly on the wheel. They were watching her already, monitoring her communications, which meant whatever she'd stumbled upon was bigger than a simple research project. As Vegas's lights appeared on the horizon, she made her decision. Morrison and his team had made a critical error. They'd threatened her unborn child. In her military intelligence days, Sarah had learned that the biggest secrets were always hidden in plain sight, protected by misdirection and intimidation. But she'd also learned that every secret left traces, and every cover-up created inconsistencies. The town existed, powered by something extraordinary, populated by people who should be dead or decades older. And now she was going to find out why. The GPS died first. Sarah watched the blue dot representing her location flicker once, twice, then vanish entirely from the screen. The device's cheerful voice fell silent mid-sentence, leaving only the rumble of her Jeep's engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. "Typical," she muttered, tapping the screen. Nothing. She'd driven this route to the Cascade Range dozens of times for her geological surveys, but never this far north. The logging road had appeared on her satellite maps as a thin line threading through the forest, promising access to an untapped mineral deposit that could make her small consulting firm's reputation. Now, 40 minutes past where the road should have dead-ended, she was beginning to question her navigation skills. Sarah pulled over and consulted her paper maps, spreading them across the passenger seat. According to the topographical charts, she should be looking at dense wilderness, not the well-maintained gravel road stretching ahead. The baby kicked as she leaned forward, and she absently rubbed her belly. At 7 months, her daughter seemed to have opinions about everything, especially long car rides. "I know, sweetie. Mama's lost again." She folded the maps with practiced efficiency. "But we're explorers, remember? Just like Great-Grandma Helen." The road curved sharply ahead, disappearing behind a wall of Douglas firs. Sarah had come too far to turn back now, and her geological instincts were humming. Something felt different about this place. The rock formations she'd glimpsed through the trees were all wrong for this region, too angular, too uniform, almost artificial. She drove on. The first sign appeared around the next bend, a cheerful green rectangle that read, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 847, established 1952. Below it, a smaller sign promised historic downtown, 2 miles. Sarah stopped the Jeep so abruptly that her seatbelt cut into her chest. She stared at the sign, then grabbed her phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual in the mountains, but the complete absence of bars felt ominous. She photographed the sign anyway, the camera's click unnaturally loud in the forest silence. Her maps showed no town within 50 miles. Millbrook didn't exist, but the road ahead was newly paved. Sarah's academic mind warred with her survival instincts. The scientist in her was fascinated by the geological anomalies and the cartographic impossibility. The pregnant woman was increasingly aware of how isolated she'd become, how her emergency beacon wouldn't work without GPS, how no one would think to look for her here because here wasn't supposed to exist. The baby kicked again, harder this time. "Okay, we'll just take a quick look," Sarah decided. "Document everything, then get out." The forest gave way to cleared land with startling suddenness. One moment she was driving through towering conifers, the next she emerged into rolling pastures dotted with Holstein cattle. Farmhouses sat nestled in the valleys between gentle hills, their white paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Silos and red barns completed the pastoral scene. It was perfect. Too perfect. Sarah had studied enough rural geography to recognize the subtle signs of age and wear that gave landscapes character. The natural chaos of real farming operations, the accumulated patina of decades. This looked like a movie set designed by someone who'd never actually lived on a farm. The road crested a small hill, and Millbrook spread out before her. The town nestled in a valley like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Tree-lined streets formed a tidy grid around a central square dominated by a white church steeple. Victorian houses with wraparound porches sat behind picket fences, their gardens bursting with late summer flowers. A water tower painted with the town name rose above it all, and she could see people walking along the sidewalks, living their lives in apparent normalcy. Sarah pulled into what appeared to be the town's main street and parked outside a diner called Millie's Place. Through the windows, she could see red vinyl booths and a lunch counter where several customers sat reading newspapers and drinking coffee. The scene was so quintessentially American it made her teeth ache. A man in coveralls emerged from the diner, noticed her Jeep, and waved with a friendly smile. Sarah waved back automatically, her mind racing. Everything looked normal, felt normal, but the wrongness pressed against her consciousness like a physical weight. She opened her field notebook and began documenting everything she could see. The architectural styles, all perfectly maintained despite supposedly dating from the 1950s. The complete absence of modern infrastructure like cell towers or satellite dishes. The way the surrounding hills seemed to form a natural bowl, hiding the town from casual observation. Most disturbing of all was the realization that had been growing since she'd seen the welcome sign. This level of isolation and concealment wasn't accidental. Someone had gone to enormous trouble to keep Millbrook hidden. The question was why, and what they might do to someone who found it. The coffee at Murphy's Diner tasted like it had been brewing since the Eisenhower administration, but Sarah wrapped her hands around the ceramic mug anyway, grateful for the warmth. The morning sickness had subsided enough for her to risk a few sips, though she couldn't shake the feeling that every person in the small establishment was watching her. "You're not from around here." The waitress, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, refilled Sarah's cup without being asked. Her name tag read, Martha. "Just passing through," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "Actually, I'm a bit lost. My GPS seems to have malfunctioned." Martha's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Technology can be unreliable out here. Where were you headed?" "I'm doing geological survey work, following some unusual mineral readings." Sarah pulled out her tablet, showing Martha the screen displaying her location data. "According to this, your town doesn't exist." The diner went quiet. Sarah became acutely aware that the handful of other customers, an elderly man reading a newspaper, 2 women sharing a piece of pie, a younger man in work clothes, had all stopped their conversations. Martha glanced at the tablet, then back at Sarah's face. "Computers make mistakes all the time. More coffee?" Before Sarah could respond, the door chimed, and a man in his 40s entered. He wore a sheriff's uniform, his badge catching the fluorescent light. Everything about him screamed authority, from his measured stride to the way his eyes immediately found Sarah. "Morning, Martha." His voice carried a slight southern accent. "Mind if I join our visitor?" It wasn't really a question. He slid into the booth across from Sarah before she could object, his presence filling the small space. Up close, she could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the careful way he positioned himself to appear relaxed while remaining ready to move quickly. "Sheriff Tom Brennan." He extended a hand. "And you are?" "Dr. Sarah Chen." She shook his hand, noting the calluses that suggested he did more than push papers. "I was just telling Martha that I seem to have taken a wrong turn somewhere. It happens. These mountain roads can be tricky." Brennan's smile never reached his eyes. "What brings you to our neck of the woods, Dr. Chen?" Sarah repeated her story about the geological survey, watching his reaction carefully. Brennan nodded along, but she caught the subtle tension in his shoulders when she mentioned the mineral readings that had led her here. "I'd be happy to help you get back to the main highway," he offered. "Wouldn't want you getting more lost, especially in your condition." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. "My condition?" "You ordered decaf coffee and asked for extra crackers. My wife was the same way when she was expecting." Brennan's observation felt more like an interrogation technique than casual conversation. "How far along?" 12 weeks. The lie came easily. She was actually 14 weeks, but something made her want to keep that information to herself. Martha appeared with a plate of toast, setting it down in front of Sarah with motherly concern. You need to keep your strength up, dear. Thank you. Sarah took a small bite, her mind racing. The kindness felt genuine, but underneath it lay something else, a current of tension that ran through every interaction in this place. You know, Brennan said, leaning back in his seat, we don't get many geologists through here. What exactly are you looking for? Sarah pulled up the spectrographic data on her tablet. These readings suggest unusual concentrations of rare earth elements, could indicate valuable mineral deposits. Brennan studied the screen with more understanding than she'd expected from a small-town sheriff. Interesting. And this led you here specifically? The readings were strongest about 5 miles north of here, near what my equipment showed as an abandoned mining operation. Sarah watched his face carefully, though I'm starting to think my equipment might need recalibration. Mining's been dead around here for decades, Brennan said, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Probably just old tailings throwing off your readings. Through the diner window, Sarah noticed a black SUV parked across the street. 2 figures sat in the front seats, their attention focused on the diner. When she looked more carefully, she realized she'd seen the same vehicle parked near the geological survey marker she'd set up yesterday. Sheriff Brennan, she said slowly. How long has Millfield existed? The question hung in the air like smoke. Brennan's smile finally faded completely. That's an odd question, Dr. Chen. It's just that I've been studying geological surveys of this area dating back to the 1940s, and I've never seen any reference to a town here. Yet this place looks like it's been established for years. Brennan stood up, dropping a $5 bill on the table. Maybe you should finish your breakfast and let me escort you back to the highway, for your safety. The silence in her motel room felt oppressive after the day's revelations. Sarah sat cross-legged on the threadbare bedspread, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees, fingers flying across the keyboard. Every search for Millbrook returned the same frustrating result. Nothing. No census data, no incorporation records, no historical mentions. It was as if the town existed in a void, carefully scrubbed from every official database. She tried satellite imagery next, zooming in on the coordinates she'd recorded. The screen showed nothing but forest canopy where she knew streets and buildings should be. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby shifted restlessly as if responding to her mounting anxiety. The pregnancy had made her more cautious lately, more aware of risks she might have dismissed 6 months ago. But this felt different. This felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with loose rocks or unstable terrain. A knock at the door made her jump. 3 sharp raps, followed by silence. Sarah closed the laptop and approached the door cautiously. The peephole revealed a tall man in a dark suit, his face obscured by shadows from the parking lot's dim lighting. She hadn't ordered room service, hadn't told anyone where she was staying. Dr. Chen? His voice carried through the thin door, professional but somehow cold. I'm Agent Morrison with the Department of Energy. I'd like to speak with you about your work in the area. The Department of Energy. Sarah's mind raced. Why would they be interested in a routine geological survey, unless it wasn't routine at all? I'm sorry, but I don't speak with federal agents without my lawyer present, she called back, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Dr. Chen, this is a matter of national security. I think you'll find our conversation mutually beneficial. National security. The phrase sent a chill down her spine. She thought of Eleanor's frightened face, of Marcus's careful words, of the 2 perfect streets of Millbrook. Leave your card, she said. I'll contact you tomorrow. A long pause. Then she heard footsteps retreating across the parking lot. When she looked through the peephole again, he was gone, but a business card had been slipped under her door. Agent David Morrison, Department of Energy, Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence. Sarah waited another 10 minutes before opening the door just enough to retrieve the card. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline mixing with pregnancy hormones in a cocktail that made her feel simultaneously exhausted and hyper-alert. She needed to leave. Tonight. As she packed her few belongings, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Some stones are better left unturned. For your baby's sake." The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the motel room floor. They knew about the pregnancy. They knew where she was staying. How long had they been watching her? Sarah forced herself to think methodically. Her car was in the parking lot, easily tracked. Her credit cards would leave a digital trail. Her phone was clearly compromised. She felt a moment of panic, trapped and vulnerable, before her training kicked in. She'd spent enough time in remote locations to know how to disappear when necessary. Not from federal agents, perhaps, but the principles were the same. 20 minutes later, she slipped out the back exit of the motel, avoiding the main parking lot. She'd left her car behind, along with her phone, both potential tracking devices now. In her backpack, she carried only cash, her laptop, and the few personal items she couldn't replace. The night air was cold against her face as she walked toward the truck stop half a mile down the road. The diner was exactly what she'd hoped for, the kind of place that operated on cash and minded its own business. She ordered coffee she wouldn't drink and a sandwich she wasn't sure she could stomach, then approached a trucker who looked like he might be heading east. "Need a ride to Harrisburg," she said quietly, sliding a $100 bill across the table. "Cash, no questions." The man looked her over, taking in her pregnant belly and tired eyes. After a moment, he nodded and pocketed the money. As they pulled out of the truck stop, Sarah caught a glimpse of black SUVs surrounding her abandoned motel. Too late, she thought with grim satisfaction. But the victory felt hollow. Whatever was happening in Millbrook was bigger than she'd imagined, important enough to mobilize federal agents in the middle of the night. The truck's engine hummed steadily as they rolled through the darkness, putting distance between Sarah and whatever forces wanted her silenced. But she knew running was only a temporary solution. Eventually, she'd have to decide how far she was willing to go to uncover the truth about Millbrook, and whether that truth was worth the risk to her unborn child. The baby kicked then, a strong flutter that felt almost like encouragement. Some fights, Sarah realized, were worth having regardless of the cost. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maya stared at the stack of photographs spread across the red vinyl booth. Each image showed the same impossible sight, vast stretches of empty desert where Millbrook should have been. The coffee in her mug had grown cold an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. "These were all taken last month," she whispered to herself, her geological training making her double-check the metadata on each photo. The coordinates matched perfectly. The landscape was wrong. Her laptop screen displayed satellite imagery from 3 different sources, all confirming what the photographs suggested. According to every official record, database, and mapping service, she had spent the night in a town that didn't exist. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her mounting anxiety. Maya pressed her hand to her stomach, trying to calm both herself and her unborn child. "What did we stumble into, little one?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Dr. Elizabeth Chen, her former professor and mentor. If anyone could help her make sense of this, it would be Liz. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Maya, this is unexpected. How's the pregnancy treating you?" "Liz, I need your help with something." "Something strange." Maya kept her voice low, suddenly aware that the elderly waitress had been hovering near her table more than necessary. "I'm sending you some coordinates. Can you pull up geological surveys for that area?" "Of course. Give me a moment." Maya could hear the clicking of keyboard keys. "Interesting. This is in the Nevada test site region. Lots of classified history there. What's your interest?" Maya hesitated. How could she explain that she'd spent the night in a town that apparently didn't exist? "I found some unusual mineral formations. The geology doesn't match what I'm seeing in the official surveys." "That's not entirely surprising. That whole area has been heavily monitored and restricted since the 1950s. Nuclear testing, military projects. A lot of the geological data from that region is either classified or deliberately obscured for security reasons. Nuclear testing. Maya's blood ran cold as she remembered Tom's words about the government's interest in Millbrook. Liz, hypothetically, could extensive underground nuclear testing create unusual geological conditions, maybe affect local ecosystems in unexpected ways? Absolutely. Underground detonations can create massive subsurface cavities, alter water tables, even change the mineral composition of surrounding rock. There are documented cases of entire landscapes being reshaped. Dr. Chen paused. Maya, are you sure you're just looking at mineral formations? Before Maya could answer, a black sedan pulled into the diner's parking lot. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements too coordinated to be casual. Maya's heart hammered against her chest as she watched them approach the entrance. Liz, I have to go. Don't research those coordinates anymore, please. Maya, what's... She ended the call and quickly gathered her photographs, shoving them into her backpack as the bell above the diner door chimed. The men entered with the practiced casualness of people accustomed to surveillance. One was tall and thin with prematurely grey hair, the other shorter and broader, with eyes that swept the restaurant methodically. Maya forced herself to remain calm, pulling out a geological journal and pretending to read. Through her peripheral vision, she watched the men approach the counter. The grey-haired man showed something to the waitress, likely a badge or identification. The woman's expression shifted from friendly service to nervous cooperation. They were asking questions about her. The waitress glanced in Maya's direction, and Maya knew she had seconds before they approached her table. She stood carefully, leaving money on the table and walking toward the restroom with the measured pace of someone in no particular hurry. Once out of sight, she slipped through the rear exit into the alley behind the diner. Her rental car was parked on the street, but reaching it meant walking past the front windows where the men would surely see her. Maya's mind raced through her options as she crept along the building's side wall. She needed to get back to Las Vegas, catch her flight, and disappear into her normal life before these people, whoever they were, decided she knew too much. A delivery truck rumbled past the alley, and Maya made her decision. She jogged alongside it, using its bulk to shield her from the diner's front windows. When she reached her car, she fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking as adrenaline flooded her system. The engine turned over just as the grey-haired man emerged from the diner, his head turning in her direction. Maya pulled into traffic, forcing herself to drive at a normal speed despite every instinct screaming at her to floor the accelerator. In her rearview mirror, she watched the black sedan pull out behind her. They weren't even trying to hide their pursuit. Maya's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the baby shifted restlessly inside her. Whatever secret Millbrook was hiding, it was big enough to kill for, and now she was carrying that secret with her, along with the growing life that depended on her for protection. The highway stretched ahead, leading back towards civilization and safety. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that safety was an illusion now. The morning light filtering through Sarah's motel room curtains felt different somehow, as if the very air had changed overnight. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over Dr. Chen's revelations and the implications of what she'd witnessed in Millbrook. The baby had been restless too, kicking more than usual, as if responding to her elevated stress levels. She reached for her phone to call Marcus, then stopped. The device felt foreign in her hands now, knowing it could be tracked, monitored, used against her. Instead, she dressed quickly and headed for the diner across the street, hoping to find a payphone, an increasingly rare artifact in the digital age. The breakfast rush was in full swing, and Sarah slipped into a corner booth, ordering coffee and trying to blend into the background chatter. 2 tables over, a man in a dark suit sat alone, his newspaper unturned for the past 10 minutes. Her pulse quickened. Paranoia, she told herself, but the feeling persisted. When the waitress brought her coffee, Sarah asked about a payphone. The woman, whose name tag read Dolores, pointed toward the back hallway near the restrooms. Sarah waited 20 minutes, watching the man in the suit, before making her move. He didn't follow. Marcus answered on the second ring. Sarah, where the hell are you? I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Marcus, listen carefully. Don't use my name again. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions. The line went quiet for a moment. You're scaring me. What's going on? I found something. Something big. But I think I'm in trouble. She glanced around the empty hallway. I need you to research Project Millbrook. Use the university databases, but be careful. Don't do it from your office or home computer. Project what? Sarah, please, just trust me. And Marcus, if anyone comes asking about me, you haven't heard from me. Can you do that? You're really scaring me now. Come home. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted nothing more than to be home, safe in Marcus's arms, pretending none of this had ever happened. But Dr. Chen's words echoed in her mind. They're watching everything now. I can't. Not yet. I love you. She hung up before he could respond and stood in the hallway for a moment, fighting tears. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder that she wasn't just protecting herself anymore. Back at her table, the man in the suit was gone, but his newspaper remained, folded to reveal a headline about advances in genetic research. Sarah's blood chilled. Coincidence? She left money for her untouched coffee and headed for the door. Outside, the September air carried a bite that promised winter was coming. Sarah walked toward her car, hyper-aware of every person on the street, every vehicle parked along the curb. She was 3 blocks from the motel when she noticed the black SUV maintaining pace with her in her rearview mirror. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. At the next intersection, she took a sudden right turn. The SUV followed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made another quick turn, then another. Still there. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't lead them back to the motel, couldn't risk being cornered in a dead-end parking lot. Instead, she drove toward the busiest part of town, pulling into a crowded shopping center and parking near the main entrance. She grabbed her backpack and hurried inside, weaving through the morning shoppers toward the back of the store. The mall connected to 3 different anchor stores. Sarah cut through the department store, past racks of autumn clothing and displays of back-to-school supplies, emerging from a side entrance that led to a different parking lot entirely. She flagged down a taxi that had just dropped off an elderly woman. "Bus station," she told the driver, though she had no intention of taking a bus anywhere. During the ride, she formulated a plan. She needed allies, people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Her thoughts turned to Dr. Elena Vasquez, her former professor who now worked as an investigative journalist. Elena had always been fearless, the kind of person who thrived on exposing uncomfortable truths. The bus station was perfect, crowded, anonymous, with multiple exits. Sarah paid the cab driver and walked inside, then immediately exited through a side door and called another taxi from a different company. As the second cab pulled away from the curb, she saw the black SUV cruise slowly through the bus station parking lot, its occupants undoubtedly searching for her. The sight sent adrenaline coursing through her system, but also something else, determination. They were definitely following her, which meant Dr. Chen had been right about everything. Millbrook, the experiments, the danger, all of it was real. And if they were willing to hunt her down this aggressively, then what she'd discovered was even more significant than she'd imagined. The question now wasn't whether to run, but how far she'd have to go to stay ahead of them long enough to expose the truth. The flickering fluorescent light above Dr. Chen's head cast harsh shadows across her weathered face as she leaned forward, her fingers interlaced on the metal table. Sarah's handcuffs clinked softly against the surface when she shifted, the sound echoing in the sterile interrogation room. "You're asking me to believe that an entire town just appeared overnight," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of scientific skepticism. "That 300 people materialized from thin air. I'm telling you what I found." Sarah's voice was hoarse from hours of questioning. The baby kicked against her ribs as if sensing her elevated stress. "Haven Village exists. Your people exist. The question is why you're all pretending it doesn't." Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. She reached into a manila folder and withdrew a series of photographs, sliding them across the table. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The images showed the exact location where she'd discovered the town, but instead of houses and streets, there was nothing but empty forest. Pine trees stood undisturbed, their canopy unbroken. No roads, no buildings, no evidence that human feet had ever touched that ground. "These were taken yesterday morning," Dr. Chen said. "Satellite imagery confirms the same thing. There is no town where you claim to have found one." Sarah stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. She could still smell the wood smoke from the chimneys, still feel the worn wooden steps beneath her feet as she'd climbed to Marcus's porch. The taste of the bitter coffee lingered in her memory. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I was there. I spent hours walking through those streets. I talked to people. Marcus, the man who brought me here, he knew things about me, about my pregnancy." "Ah, yes, Marcus." Dr. Chen flipped through her notes. "Tell me more about him." Sarah described the gentle giant with his knowing eyes and careful way of speaking. She recounted their conversation about adaptation and survival, the way he'd seemed to understand her situation without her explaining it. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally jotting down notes. When Sarah finished, the doctor was quiet for a long moment. "Describe his appearance again, every detail." Sarah closed her eyes, reconstructing Marcus's face in her mind. Tall, maybe 6'5", sandy brown hair, graying at the temples, blue eyes with gold flecks, a scar on his left cheek about 2 inches long. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. Dr. Chen's pen stopped moving. Her face had gone pale. "What year did you say you encountered him?" "What kind of question is that?" "This year. Yesterday." Sarah's frustration boiled over. "What game are you playing here?" Instead of answering, Dr. Chen left the room. Sarah heard muffled voices in the corridor, urgent whispers that she couldn't quite make out. When the doctor returned, she carried a different folder, this one yellowed with age. "I need to show you something," Dr. Chen said, her professional composure cracking slightly. She opened the folder and removed a black and white photograph, placing it carefully in front of Sarah. The image showed a man in military uniform standing beside what looked like scientific equipment. The photograph was grainy, clearly old, but the face was unmistakable. It was Marcus, exactly as Sarah had seen him, down to the scar on his cheek. Sarah picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. "When was this taken?" 1962. Dr. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is Dr. Marcus Kellerman. He was the lead researcher on Project Chrysalis until his death in 1965. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like an angry insect. "That's impossible. I talked to him yesterday. He's alive. He brought me here." "Sarah, I need you to listen very carefully." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her scientific detachment replaced by something that looked like fear. Project Chrysalis was shut down 40 years ago after a catastrophic accident. Everyone involved was sworn to secrecy. The official records were sealed. What kind of accident? The kind that makes people disappear. The kind that creates anomalies we don't understand. Dr. Chen rubbed her temples. "What you're describing, a town that exists but doesn't exist, people who are alive but dead. It sounds like an echo, a temporal disturbance we've been monitoring for decades." Sarah felt the baby move again, stronger this time, as if responding to her racing heartbeat. "You're talking about time travel." "Not travel, displacement. Fragments of past events bleeding through into the present. We've detected similar phenomena at other chrysalis sites, but nothing this substantial, nothing involving direct contact with—" She gestured vaguely at Sarah. "With what?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face as if seeing her for the first time. "With someone whose unique physiology might act as a conductor for temporal energy," she finally said. "Someone who's carrying new life." The static from the radio crackled through the kitchen as Maya adjusted the frequency, searching for any signal that might connect them to the outside world. 3 days had passed since her confrontation with Dr. Chen, and the town felt different now, like a stage where the actors had forgotten their lines. "Still nothing," she muttered, switching off the device. David sat at the small table behind her, methodically cleaning his service weapon. The sight should have been reassuring, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. A sharp kick from the baby made her wince. Even her unborn child seemed restless, as if sensing the tension that permeated everything. She placed her hand on her belly, whispering, "I know, little one. I want to get out of here too." The knock at the door came precisely at 8 a.m., just as it had for the past 2 mornings. Maya exchanged a look with David, who holstered his weapon and moved to answer it. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Henderson from next door, holding a covered dish and wearing the same pleasant smile she'd worn every day since Maya's arrival. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson chirped when David opened the door. "I brought you some fresh muffins. Blueberry. So good for the baby." Maya studied the older woman's face, searching for any crack in the facade. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Henderson. How long have you lived in Haven Valley?" The question hung in the air like smoke. For just a moment, Mrs. Henderson's smile flickered. "Oh, goodness. Time flies so fast here, feels like forever." She pressed the dish into David's hands. "You two have a blessed day now." As soon as the door closed, David set the muffins on the counter without ceremony. "We're not eating those," he said flatly. Maya nodded. She'd stopped trusting the food after finding a subtle, bitter aftertaste in everything offered by the townspeople. Her pregnancy vitamins were the only pills she'd been taking, hidden in her makeup bag. "I found something last night," David said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "While you were sleeping, I went back to the laboratory building." This was in Chen's office. Maya unfolded the document, her hands trembling slightly. It was a medical report dated 3 weeks ago, detailing blood work for someone identified only as Subject 47F. The hormone levels were unmistakable. It was her blood, drawn during her supposed prenatal checkup with Dr. Morrison. But it was the handwritten notes in the margin that made her blood run cold, fetal development accelerated. "Cellular anomalies consistent with exposure. Recommend immediate extraction and analysis." "They've been testing me," she whispered. "Testing the baby." David's jaw tightened. "There's more. I found records going back 30 years. Maya, there have been others, pregnant women who wandered into town. None of them ever left." The room spun slightly, and Maya gripped the counter for support. "Where are they now?" "That's what we need to find out." He moved to the window, peering through the blinds, the cemetery at the edge of town. "I'm thinking we check it tonight." A new sound interrupted them. Vehicles approaching. Maya joined David at the window and watched as 3 black SUVs rolled down Main Street, moving with military precision. They stopped in front of the clinic, and men in dark suits emerged, their movements efficient and purposeful. "Government plates," David muttered. "This is escalating fast." Maya's phone buzzed, the first time it had shown any signal since her arrival. A single text from an unknown number. "They know you know. Back door. 5 minutes. Come alone." She showed David the message. His face darkened. "Absolutely not. It's obviously a trap." "Maybe," Maya said, already moving toward the rear of the house. "But what if it's not? What if someone's trying to help?" "Maya, don't." But she was already at the back door, peering through its small window. A figure stood in the shadows between the houses. Dr. Morrison, but different somehow. Gone was the gentle demeanor she'd shown during Maya's examination. Now she looked haggard, desperate. Against David's urgent protests, Maya opened the door. "Dr. Morrison?" The woman stepped forward, revealing dark circles under her eyes and hands that shook with either fear or withdrawal. "They're moving up the timeline. The men who just arrived. They're here for you and the baby, tonight." "What timeline? What are you talking about?" "The harvest," Morrison whispered, the word carrying a weight that made Maya's skin crawl. "Every 30 years they collect what they've been growing. You're the last one they need." David appeared behind Maya, his hand resting on his weapon. "Growing what?" Dr. Morrison's eyes darted between them. then settled on Maya's pregnant belly with an expression of profound sadness. The next generation. Children who can survive what's coming, what they've been preparing for since 1952. The distant sound of boots on pavement echoed through the morning air, growing closer. "There's a way out," Morrison continued urgently. "But you have to trust me, and we have to go now." The basement beneath the clinic stretched deeper than Sarah had imagined possible. Dr. Chen's flashlight beam carved through the darkness, revealing concrete walls that seemed to absorb their footsteps. The air grew thicker with each step downward, carrying the antiseptic smell of a laboratory mixed with something else, something organic and unsettling. "How long has this been here?" Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Since the beginning," Chen replied, his voice echoing off the narrow walls. Before Eden Falls existed above ground, this facility was already operational. They reached a heavy steel door marked with radiation warnings and biohazard symbols. Chen pressed his palm against a scanner that hummed to life, its green light painting their faces in an eerie glow. The locks disengaged with a series of metallic clicks. Beyond the door lay a corridor lined with observation windows, each revealing a different laboratory. Sarah peered through the first window and felt her breath catch. Inside, a woman sat connected to monitoring equipment, her swollen belly indicating she was well into her third trimester. Electrodes covered her temples, and strange symbols scrolled across multiple screens surrounding her. "My God," Sarah breathed. "She's pregnant." "They all are," Chen said grimly, leading her past window after window. Each room contained another expectant mother, all connected to similar monitoring systems. Some appeared to be sleeping, others sat in meditation-like poses, their eyes closed in apparent concentration. "What are you doing to them?" Chen stopped at a control room filled with banks of computers and monitoring stations. Charts and graphs displayed incomprehensible data streams, while video feeds showed each of the pregnant women from multiple angles. "We're not doing anything to them, Sarah. They're volunteers. They came here seeking what you're seeking, answers about their children's abilities." Sarah studied the screens more carefully. The symbols scrolling past looked familiar somehow, triggering a memory she couldn't quite grasp. "Their children have abilities?" "Enhanced cognitive function, telepathic tendencies, precognitive flashes." "Sound familiar?" Chen's eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. The mothers began experiencing similar symptoms during pregnancy. "Just like you." The realization hit her like ice water. The visions, the strange dreams, the inexplicable knowledge. It wasn't unique to her. How many? 43 women, over the past 15 years, all pregnant with children showing signs of genetic enhancement, all drawn here by the same inexplicable compulsion that brought you to Eden Falls. Sarah backed away from the monitors, her heart racing. "This isn't natural. You're experimenting on them." "We're studying a phenomenon that began long before our involvement," Chen corrected. "The first enhanced child was born in 1967, a baby girl whose brain activity registered patterns we'd never seen before. By age 3, she could solve complex mathematical equations. By 5, she was demonstrating clear telepathic abilities. Where is she now?" Chen's expression darkened. "She died at age 12, a brain hemorrhage. We didn't understand then what we were dealing with." The corridor suddenly felt claustrophobic. Sarah needed air, needed space to process what she was learning. "So you built this place to study others like her?" "To help them. The early enhanced children didn't survive to adulthood. Their brains couldn't handle the neurological changes. But we've learned. The women you see here, their children have a much better chance of surviving because of our intervention." "And if I refuse your help?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Your son's brain activity is already showing enhancement patterns. Without proper medical support during the crucial developmental phase, the probability of survival drops to less than 20%. The weight of the choice settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. Her hand moved protectively to her belly again, feeling the subtle movements of her unborn child. What exactly would your intervention involve? Monitoring, primarily. Brain scans for both you and the baby. Medication to support neurological development. Complete medical supervision during delivery. And afterward, educational support for your son as he grows. For how long? Until he reaches adulthood and can make his own choices about his abilities. Sarah studied the screens again, watching the peaceful faces of the women in their monitoring stations. They didn't look like prisoners or victims. They looked serene. What happens to the children born here? Where are they now? Chen led her to another bank of monitors showing what appeared to be a school. Children of various ages sat in classrooms, but instead of traditional lessons, they seemed to be engaged in exercises that made Sarah's head spin, moving objects without touching them, communicating silently across the room, solving problems that flickered by too quickly for normal human comprehension. "They're extraordinary," Chen said with unmistakable pride. "They represent the next step in human evolution, and your son could be one of them." Sarah watched the children, marveling at their abilities while fighting a growing sense of unease. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. And if I say no? If I try to leave Eden Falls? Chen's reflection in the dark window seemed to smile. But when Sarah turned to look at him directly, his expression remained neutral. "Why would you want to leave? Everything you need is here." The question hung in the air like a threat wrapped in silk. The laboratory's emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow as Sarah crept through the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The digital files from Dr. Chen's computer were stored safely on the flash drive in her pocket, but she needed physical evidence, something tangible that couldn't be dismissed as fabricated data. Behind her, she could hear Marcus's voice echoing through the facility as he coordinated with the security team. They'd discovered her absence faster than she'd hoped. The baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety, and she pressed a hand to her belly. "Just a little longer," she whispered. The specimen storage room lay at the end of the hallway, its reinforced door standing slightly ajar. Sarah slipped inside, immediately hit by the antiseptic smell of preservation chemicals. Rows of refrigerated units lined the walls, each marked with cryptic alphanumeric codes. She pulled out her phone's flashlight, keeping the beam low as she searched for anything that might connect to Project Genesis. Most of the labels meant nothing to her, but one section made her blood run cold. A series of containers marked with dates spanning 40 years, each labeled atmospheric sample, gen exposure. The earliest date was 1983, the year Millbrook had supposedly been founded. With trembling fingers, she opened one of the newer containers. Inside was a small vial of what looked like ordinary air, but the accompanying documentation told a different story. Microscopic organisms, unlike anything in known taxonomy. Organisms that seem to enhance cellular regeneration and cognitive function while remaining completely undetectable in standard medical tests. Sarah photographed everything, her phone's camera flash briefly illuminating the sterile room. As she moved to the next section, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Her pulse spiked, but the steps passed by without stopping. The final section contained what she'd been dreading to find. Human tissue samples. Each specimen was carefully labeled with initials and dates, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she recognized some of the initials. JM, that would be Janet Morrison, the woman who'd welcomed her so warmly at the diner. RK could be Robert Kellerman, the friendly shopkeeper. These people hadn't just been exposed to whatever was in Millbrook's air, they were being studied like laboratory subjects. A soft sound made her freeze. Someone was typing on a keyboard in an adjacent room, the rhythmic clicking barely audible through the wall. Sarah turned off her flashlight and listened, trying to determine if it was safe to continue searching. That's when she noticed the unmarked door at the back of the storage room. Unlike the others, this one required a keycard, but it had been left slightly open. Sarah pushed through it carefully, finding herself in what appeared to be a much older section of the facility. The walls were concrete instead of the modern materials used elsewhere. and the lighting was different, harsher, more institutional. This was the original laboratory, she realized, the place where it all began. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their metal surfaces dulled with age. Sarah opened the nearest drawer and found herself looking at handwritten reports from the 1980s. Dr. Edmund Vasquez's signature appeared on most of them, documenting the early stages of something called Environmental Enhancement Protocol. The reports detailed the systematic release of modified atmospheric agents in isolated test populations. Millbrook wasn't just exposed to whatever these organisms were, it had been deliberately infected. The entire town was a living laboratory, its residents unknowing participants in a multi-generational experiment. But as Sarah read deeper into the files, she discovered something that made her knees nearly buckle. The experiment wasn't limited to Millbrook. There were references to other sites, other communities scattered across rural America, dozens of them, each one carefully monitored and maintained as the project evolved over decades. A map tucked between two reports showed the locations, connected by red lines that formed an intricate web across the continent. Sarah photographed it quickly, her hands shaking so badly she had to take several shots to get a clear image. The sound of approaching voices sent her scrambling to close the files and back toward the main storage room. She could hear Marcus calling her name now, his tone shifting from concern to suspicion. They would find her soon. As she prepared to leave, one final document caught her eye. It was a recent medical report bearing her own name. Sarah Parker. Test subject classification, pregnant female, uninfected. Recommended protocol, extended observation, fetal development monitoring. They hadn't brought her here to silence her. They'd brought her here to study her, to see what would happen when an uninfected pregnant woman was exposed to their atmospheric agents. She and her unborn child were now part of the experiment. The voices were getting closer. Sarah stuffed the document into her jacket and headed for the door, her mind racing. She had the evidence she needed, but now she had to survive long enough to share it with the world, and she had to protect her baby from whatever these people had planned. The red emergency lighting seemed to pulse like a heartbeat as she stepped back into the corridor, carrying secrets that could topple governments and truths that some would kill to protect. The medical bay's sterile white walls seemed to close in around Elena as Dr. Reeves adjusted the ultrasound machine. The familiar hum of the equipment should have been comforting, but Elena's muscles remained tense, coiled like springs ready to snap. Marcus stood beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder, yet she could feel the distance growing between them with each passing hour in this place that defied explanation. "Everything looks normal," Dr. Reeves murmured, moving the wand across Elena's swollen belly. The monitor displayed the familiar grainy image of her baby, limbs curled and peaceful. 28 weeks, healthy development, strong heartbeat. But Elena wasn't watching the screen. She was studying Dr. Reeves's face, searching for the telltale signs she'd learned to recognize among Haven's residents. The slight delay in responses, as if they were consulting some internal database before speaking. The way their eyes sometimes seemed to focus on something just beyond what was visible. "Doctor," Elena said carefully, "have you delivered many babies here in Haven?" The woman's hand paused for just a fraction of a second. "Several. Children are precious here. We take excellent care of our mothers. What about complications, birth defects, genetic anomalies?" Dr. Reeves's smile never wavered, but Elena caught the microscopic tightening around her eyes. "Nothing outside normal parameters. Haven has been blessed with healthy children." Elena exchanged a glance with Marcus. They both knew the statistics. In any population of 1,500, there should be variations, problems, the full spectrum of human genetic diversity, another impossibility to add to their growing list. After the appointment, they walked through Haven's perfectly manicured streets. Children played in the park, their laughter echoing off the surrounding mountains. But Elena noticed what she'd missed before. The children all appeared remarkably similar in their development, their behavior patterns almost synchronized. Even their games followed identical rules, identical rhythms. "We need to get into that research facility," Elena whispered as they passed a group of mothers pushing identical strollers. "Tonight," Marcus nodded grimly. "I've been watching the patrol patterns. There's a 15-minute gap when the guards change shifts at midnight." They spent the afternoon preparing, gathering supplies from their assigned house while maintaining the facade of grateful refugees. As evening fell, Elena felt the baby kick restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering silent reassurances. The research facility loomed against the star-filled sky, its angular architecture alien among Haven's quaint buildings. Elena and Marcus crept through the shadows, timing their movement to the guards' predictable rounds. The main entrance was secured with both traditional locks and electronic keypads, but Marcus had always been good with his hands. Inside, emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows down sterile corridors. Their footsteps echoed softly despite their efforts at stealth. Elena's geological training had taught her to navigate underground spaces, and something about the facility's layout felt familiar, like the research stations she'd worked in during her graduate studies. They found the first laboratory behind a door marked Developmental Studies. Elena's blood chilled as she took in rows of specimens floating in preservation fluid, human embryos at various stages of development, but wrong somehow. Too uniform, too perfect. Computer monitors displayed genetic sequences that made no sense, double helixes twisted into patterns that shouldn't exist. "Jesus," Marcus breathed, photographing everything with the camera they'd salvaged from Elena's truck. What were they trying to do? Elena studied a wall chart showing generational progressions. The dates went back 60 years, tracking something through multiple generations of test subjects. "Not were," she whispered. "Ah, this is ongoing." A sound in the corridor froze them both. Footsteps, measured and deliberate. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward a supply closet. They squeezed inside just as the laboratory door opened. Through the slats, Elena watched Dr. Reeves enter with another woman she didn't recognize. They moved directly to a computer terminal, their movements synchronized in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. "Subject 1847 shows promising integration," Dr. Reeves said, her voice oddly flat. "The pregnancy proceeds within acceptable parameters." Elena's heart stopped. Subject 1847. They were talking about her. "The genetic markers are stabilizing faster than previous iterations," the other woman replied. "The hybridization process appears to be accelerating with each generation." "Excellent. The director will be pleased. How long until we can proceed to the final phase?" 12 weeks. "Once the subject delivers, we'll have everything we need." Elena bit her lip to keep from crying out as the baby kicked violently, as if responding to the conversation. Marcus's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing tight. The women continued their discussion, using terms Elena recognized from genetics textbooks but arranged in combinations that made no scientific sense. They spoke of neural integration, consciousness transfer, evolutionary acceleration, and through it all, they spoke of her baby as if it were nothing more than a carefully cultivated specimen. When the laboratory finally fell silent again, Elena and Marcus remained hidden for several more minutes before emerging. Elena's hands shook as she stared at the genetic charts with new understanding. They weren't just trapped in Haven. They were part of the experiment. The basement archives beneath Millbrook's town hall smelled of decay and forgotten time. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of filing cabinets that stretched into the shadows. Her pregnancy made every step deliberate, but adrenaline pushed her forward. Marcus had bought her this window of opportunity by creating a distraction at the community center, and she couldn't waste it. The first cabinet yielded nothing but mundane municipal records, water bills, property assessments, meeting minutes that read like theatrical scripts. But in the third cabinet, her fingers found a folder marked Project Genesis, phase documentation. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The documents inside made her stomach lurch. Medical charts tracking pregnancies, birth weights, developmental milestones. Names she recognized from around town: Elena Vasquez, Dr. Chen, even Martha from the diner. But these records went back decades, far longer than any of these people could have lived in Millbrook. A photograph slipped from between the pages. Sarah aimed her flashlight at it and gasped. The image showed a group of scientists in white coats standing before a building she recognized as the current medical center. But the date stamp read 1962, and the building looked brand new. In the center of the group stood a man whose face sent ice through her veins, Dr. Reeves, looking exactly as he did today. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Sarah's pulse spiked as she quickly photographed the documents with her phone, the camera flash seeming deafeningly bright in the confined space. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by voices she couldn't quite make out. She stuffed the folder back into place and searched frantically for another exit. Behind the last row of cabinets, she discovered a narrow maintenance tunnel. Without hesitation, she crawled inside, her belly making the passage uncomfortably tight. The musty air felt thick in her lungs as she pulled the cabinet back to conceal the entrance just as the basement door opened. "She was definitely down here," a voice said. One of the security guards from the medical center. "I can smell her perfume." Sarah held her breath, pressing herself against the cold concrete wall of the tunnel. Her baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing her fear. Through the gap beneath the cabinet, she could see flashlight beams sweeping the floor. "Check every cabinet," another voice ordered. This one she recognized as the town mayor, though his tone carried an authority that seemed to extend far beyond municipal politics. "If she found the Genesis files, we have a problem. What about the Marcus situation?" "Henderson's handling it. The man asked too many questions at the wrong time." They both did. Sarah's blood turned cold. They had Marcus. Her breathing became shallow, panicked. She forced herself to focus on the tunnel ahead, crawling forward inch by painful inch. The passage seemed to extend beneath the entire building, with junction points leading in different directions. Behind her, the sound of filing cabinets being systematically opened echoed through the basement. She chose the tunnel that seemed to slope upward, hoping it would lead to street level. Her phone's battery was draining fast, but she kept the camera ready, documenting everything she could see in the brief moments when she dared use the flashlight. The tunnel eventually opened into what appeared to be a utility room in another building. Sarah emerged carefully, her maternity clothes dirty and torn. Through a grimy window, she could see she was in the building adjacent to the town hall, the old hardware store that had been closed since she arrived. Her phone buzzed with a text message that made her heart sink. "Sarah, we need to talk. Come to the medical center. Marcus is safe, but time is running out. Dr. Reeves." The message felt like a trap, but what choice did she have? If they had Marcus, she couldn't just run. And running where? Her car was back at the house, probably under surveillance. The main road out of town would be watched. Millbrook suddenly felt less like a hidden sanctuary and more like an elaborate prison. As she peered through the hardware store window, Sarah noticed something that made her breath catch. Across the street, in broad daylight, she could see people moving with an odd, synchronized quality, not quite robotic, but purposeful in a way that seemed rehearsed. A woman pushing a stroller stopped to chat with a man walking his dog, but their conversation had the stilted quality of actors running through their marks. The baby kicked forcefully, and Sarah placed her hand on her belly. "I know," she whispered. "Something's very wrong here." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. Marcus tied to a chair in what looked like the medical center's basement. His face was bruised, but his eyes were alert, angry. The message that followed was simple: 1 hour. Come alone. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think past the fear. The Genesis files, Dr. Reeves's impossible age, the synchronized behavior of the townspeople, it all pointed to something far bigger than a simple government experiment. And somehow her unborn child was at the center of it all. The safe house felt more like a tomb than sanctuary. Maya pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as another contraction rippled through her. not labor pains, stress, the baby responding to her terror. Dr. Reeves had been gone for 3 hours, promising to return with transportation and proof that would expose Haven's dark secrets to the world. She shouldn't have trusted him. The sound of approaching vehicles made her blood freeze. Multiple engines, heavy tires on gravel. Maya peered through the boarded window and saw black SUVs surrounding the abandoned warehouse. Her breath caught as familiar figures emerged. Director Chen, flanked by Haven's security team, their movements precise and predatory. "Dr. Chen, I know you're in there." Chen's voice carried through the thin walls, artificially calm. "Dr. Reeves has told us everything." Maya's heart plummeted. Either Marcus was dead or he'd betrayed her. Neither possibility offered comfort. "You're carrying something precious," Chen continued, "something that belongs to us. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the way that ensures your child never draws breath." The threat against her baby ignited something primal in Maya. She moved through the warehouse's maze of abandoned equipment, searching for another exit. Her geological training kicked in, reading the building's structure like sedimentary layers, finding weaknesses in the concrete foundation where decades of settling had created fissures. Behind her, the front door splintered. Maya found what she was looking for, a drainage tunnel that connected to the old mining system beneath the town. The grate was rusted but movable. She squeezed through just as boots thundered across the warehouse floor above. The tunnel was a tight fit, made worse by her pregnancy, but fear drove her forward through the darkness. The beam of her phone's flashlight revealed ancient mining infrastructure, support beams from the 1940s, the same era when Haven's experiments began. Everything connected to that damned place. She emerged into a larger chamber and immediately knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The space wasn't empty. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying biometric data, surveillance feeds from throughout the region, and genetic sequences that made her skin crawl. This wasn't just an abandoned mine. It was Haven's true command center. "Impressive navigation skills, Dr. Chen." Maya spun around. Dr. Reeves stepped from the shadows, but something was wrong with his appearance. His skin seemed to shimmer in the artificial light, and his eyes held an inhuman quality she'd missed before. "You're one of them," she whispered. "Second generation," Marcus confirmed, his voice lacking any trace of the warmth she'd trusted. "My parents were among the first successful subjects. I've been monitoring you since you stumbled into our territory 3 days ago." The betrayal cut deeper than fear. The recordings, the evidence, carefully curated to keep you compliant while we determined how much you knew. He gestured to the monitors. "We've been tracking researchers like you for decades, geologists, anthropologists, anyone whose work might accidentally uncover our existence." Maya backed toward what looked like another tunnel entrance. "What do you want with my baby?" "Your child isn't just developing normally, Dr. Chen. The mineral exposure in Haven, the electromagnetic fields, the very air you've been breathing, it's accelerated certain genetic expressions we've been working toward for 70 years. Horror flooded through her. "You're saying my baby is—" The next step, a natural bridge between baseline humans and what we're becoming. Marcus moved closer, his movements too fluid, too precise. "Your child will be born with capabilities that took us generations to engineer. We can't let that potential disappear into the world unmonitored." Maya felt the tunnel opening behind her and made a desperate calculation. The government doesn't know about this place, do they? Haven was just the visible layer. Haven is our public face, our controlled environment for observing transition subjects. "This," he gestured around them, "is where the real work happens." She understood now why they'd been so willing to let her walk through Haven, why the residents had seemed almost performative in their normalcy. It was all theater, designed to make her think she'd discovered their secret while the real operation remained hidden underground. "You're going to disappear," Marcus continued. "Officially, you'll have died in a mining accident while conducting unauthorized research. Your child will be raised here, properly guided, properly trained. Like hell." Maya grabbed an emergency flare from the mining equipment and struck it against the wall. The brilliant red light filled the chamber, and she hurled it directly into the bank of computer equipment. Sparks erupted as monitors exploded and electrical systems overloaded. In the chaos of shorting circuits and emergency alarms, she plunged into the tunnel behind her. Behind her, Marcus's inhuman roar of rage echoed through the chamber, but she was already running through darkness, following the slight current of air that promised another way out. Her baby kicked hard, as if responding to the danger, and Maya made a silent promise. Whatever it took, she would protect her child from becoming Haven's next experiment. The basement laboratory stretched further than Sarah had imagined, a sprawling underground complex that seemed to burrow deep into the mountain itself. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across banks of humming servers and monitoring equipment that looked decades more advanced than anything she'd seen topside. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something organic and unsettling. "The real Meridian Project," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the mechanical symphony surrounding them. "What they've been hiding all these years." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly as they crept between rows of machinery. The baby had been restless since they'd entered the facility, as if somehow sensing the wrongness of this place. Through observation windows, she glimpsed laboratory chambers filled with strange equipment and what looked like specimen containers. A soft beeping drew their attention to a central console where dozens of monitors displayed real-time data streams. Biological readouts, genetic sequences, and graphs tracking everything from brain activity to cellular regeneration rates. Sarah felt her blood run cold as she recognized the statistical patterns, population genetics, the kind of data that required samples from an entire community. "They're not just studying the townspeople," she breathed. "They're breeding them." Marcus leaned over her shoulder to examine the displays more closely. "Look at these dates. This has been going on for 3 generations. Selective reproduction, genetic manipulation." His voice trailed off as new information scrolled across the screens. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell behind them. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him deeper into the laboratory maze. They ducked behind a bank of centrifuges as voices drifted down from above. Dr. Henley and at least 2 others, their words sharp with urgency. "Containment protocols are in effect, but we need to accelerate the timeline. The subject's pregnancy could compromise everything we've worked for. The neural pathways are still developing. If we extract the fetus now—" "No." Henley's voice cut through the argument like ice. "The child must come to term naturally. The epigenetic markers won't be viable otherwise. Find them both and bring them to Laboratory 7. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. They weren't just studying her baby, they needed it. Whatever genetic modifications they'd been perfecting in Meridian's population, her child represented the next phase of their experiment. She and Marcus moved deeper into the complex, following signs that led toward what appeared to be a secondary exit. The laboratory seemed to expand endlessly, revealing new horrors with each corridor they traversed. Chambers filled with suspended animation pods, walls lined with genetic samples labeled with names she recognized from the town directory, children's drawings posted near workstations like some grotesque parody of a normal workplace. "Here," Marcus hissed, pointing to a heavy door marked "Emergency Exit to Authorized Personnel Only." He fumbled with the electronic lock while Sarah kept watch, her anxiety mounting with every passing second. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and cool mountain air rushed through the opening. They emerged into a natural cave system that had been modified with concrete reinforcement and lighting. A narrow path led upward toward what Sarah hoped was the surface. But as they climbed, the sound of pursuit echoed behind them. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, accompanied by radio chatter and the unmistakable sound of tactical equipment. The government agents had found their escape route. "There's another entrance," Marcus said, consulting a maintenance map he'd grabbed from the emergency station. "But it's on the other side of town. We'd have to cross the main square." Sarah weighed their options, both equally dangerous. Stay hidden in the caves and risk capture, or venture back into Meridian where every resident might be watching for them. The baby kicked forcefully, as if adding its own vote to the decision. The town, she decided. If we can reach the other entrance, maybe we can find a way to get word out about what's happening here. They emerged from a concealed cave mouth into the pre-dawn darkness. Meridian looked peaceful in the early morning light, its quaint streets and cheerful storefronts hiding the nightmare that lurked beneath. But Sarah now noticed details that had escaped her before. The subtle surveillance cameras disguised as decorative elements, the way certain buildings lacked windows on their lower levels, the absence of any animals or pets in a community that should have been teeming with life. Moving from shadow to shadow, they made their way through residential areas where families were just beginning to stir. Sarah wondered if these people knew the truth about their existence, or if they were as much victims as she was. Were the children born here even fully human anymore, or had decades of genetic manipulation created something else entirely? The main square loomed ahead, wide and exposed in the growing daylight. Once they crossed it, they'd be committed to their escape route with no way back. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling her child's movements slow, as if it too understood the gravity of their situation. They stepped into the open, and immediately every window in the square lit up with watching eyes. The laboratory's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Sarah pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby kicked restlessly as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. Through the glass partition, she could see Dr. Chen hunched over a computer terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard with desperate urgency. "The backup systems are failing faster than I anticipated," he whispered, not looking up from the screen. Whatever Hartwell did to trigger the containment protocol, it's cascading through the entire facility. Sarah watched the progress bar creeping across the monitor, 67% complete on the data transfer. Each percentage point felt like an eternity. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had grown closer. Heavy boots on metal grating, the crackle of radio chatter, the mechanical whir of surveillance drones being deployed. "They know where we are," she said, placing a protective hand over her belly. "This whole section is probably monitored." "Almost certainly." Chen's face was illuminated by the screen's glow, deep lines of concentration etched around his eyes. "But this is the only terminal with the clearance level we need. Everything else has been locked down." The baby shifted again, and Sarah felt a strange warmth spreading through her abdomen. For a moment, the red emergency light seemed to flicker in response. She blinked, certain she had imagined it, but Chen had noticed too. "Your vitals," he said quietly, glancing at the biometric scanner still attached to her wrist. "The readings are unusual." Sarah looked down at the device. The numbers were indeed strange. Her heart rate appeared normal, but there was another rhythm being detected, something slower, deeper, almost like a secondary pulse that seemed to sync with the facility's power fluctuations. "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure. But given what we know about the atmospheric exposure, about the generational changes—" He paused, his expression troubled. "Your child may be more affected than we initially thought." The progress bar jumped to 78%. Behind them, voices grew louder. Sarah could make out Hartwell's distinctive tone, cold and commanding as he directed the search teams. They were running out of time. "There," Chen said suddenly, pointing through the glass to another section of the lab. "Do you see that cabinet marked Biological Archives?" Sarah followed his gaze to a tall metal cabinet with multiple locked drawers. "What about it?" "Physical tissue samples from the original test subjects. If something happens to this data transfer, those samples are our backup proof. Independent verification of everything I've been documenting. I can't leave you here. You have to." The progress bar hit 85%. "Someone needs to survive this to tell the truth, and right now, you're carrying the most important evidence of all." The lights flickered again, and this time Sarah was certain it coincided with the baby's movement. The sensation was stronger now, as if something was awakening inside her. Not just the child, but something else, something that resonated with the very technology surrounding them. "Dr. Chen," she said slowly, "what if the experiments weren't just about creating a sustainable population? What if they were about evolution, about creating something new?" His hands stilled on the keyboard. "What are you suggesting?" "The atmospheric exposure, the genetic modifications. What if they weren't just adaptations? What if they were upgrades?" She touched her belly again, feeling that strange pulse beneath her fingertips. "What if my child isn't just immune to the changes? What if it's part of them?" The computer chimed softly. 92% complete. "That would explain the power fluctuations around you," Chen said thoughtfully. "If the neural pathways are somehow interfacing with electromagnetic fields." His words were cut off by the sharp sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Too close now. Sarah could see shadows moving beyond the frosted glass of the laboratory doors. "Go," Chen urged, ejecting a data drive from the terminal. "Take this. Get to the biological archives, grab what you can, and find another way out. What about you?" "I'll buy you time." He handed her the drive, their fingers touching briefly. His were ice cold. "Sarah, whatever your child becomes, whatever this all means, the world needs to know. Not just about Haven, but about what comes next." The progress bar hit 98%. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Sarah clutched the data drive and moved toward the rear exit of the lab, her body casting strange shadows in the red emergency lighting. Behind her, she heard Chen deleting files, erasing their digital trail, even as the final percentage points ticked by. The door handle began to turn. She slipped through the exit just as the laboratory door burst open, Hartwell's voice echoing through the chamber like thunder. But by then, Sarah was already running through the maintenance corridors, the truth burning in her pocket and something far more profound stirring in her womb. The helicopter's rotors sliced through the dawn air as Sarah pressed herself against the cold metal floor, her hands protectively cradling her belly. Through the small porthole, she watched the landscape blur past, endless stretches of desert punctuated by jagged mountains that seemed to claw at the sky. Dr. Chen sat across from her, his face pale but determined, while Marcus maintained radio silence with their pilot, a grizzled ex-military man named Rodriguez, who owed Marcus more favors than Sarah cared to count. "ETA 15 minutes, Rodriguez called back, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "But we've got company incoming from the northeast. 3 birds, military markings." Sarah's heart lurched. She'd hoped they'd have more time before Blackwood's people found them, but the tracking device hidden in her jacket, the one Marcus had discovered and destroyed only hours ago, had already done its damage. They were flying blind now, racing toward coordinates that Dr. Chen insisted would lead them to Project Genesis's true headquarters, the place where all the answers lay buried. There, Chen pointed through the window at a collection of structures nestled in a valley between 2 mountain ranges. From this height, it looked like any other government installation, concrete buildings arranged in geometric patterns, communication towers, a small airfield. But Sarah could see something else, the telltale shimmer of the same energy field that had surrounded Millbrook, the same distortion that had hidden an entire town from satellite imagery for decades. "That's it," Chen said, his voice tight with emotion. "Site 7, where it all began." The helicopter banked sharply as Rodriguez tried to avoid the incoming aircraft, but Sarah could see they weren't going to make it to the landing zone undetected. Through her earpiece, she heard the crackle of military communications, cold voices coordinating an intercept pattern. "We're going to have to put down hard and fast," Marcus said, checking his weapon. "Sarah, whatever happens, you stay with Chen and get to that central building. Find the data core, download everything you can." "What about you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Someone's got to slow them down." The helicopter dropped suddenly, Sarah's stomach lurching as they descended toward the facility's perimeter. She could see figures running across the compound now, personnel in hazmat suits scrambling toward what looked like an underground bunker. They were destroying evidence, she realized. Blackwood had given the order to sanitize everything. Rodriguez touched down behind a cluster of storage tanks, the helicopter's skids hitting concrete with a bone-jarring impact. "Go, go, go!" he shouted, and Sarah found herself stumbling out into the harsh desert air, Chen's hand gripping her elbow as they ran toward the nearest building. Behind them, the pursuing helicopters thundered overhead, searchlights cutting through the morning gloom. Gunfire erupted, sharp staccato bursts that made Sarah's blood freeze. Marcus was already engaged, his rifle answering the incoming fire with disciplined precision. The facility was larger than it had appeared from the air. Sarah and Chen ducked between buildings, following maintenance corridors and service tunnels that Chen seemed to navigate from memory. His breathing was labored, and she realized he was older than she'd initially thought, probably in his 70s. "I helped design this place," he gasped as they paused beside a ventilation grate. "Back when we thought we were saving the world." They reached the central building through a service entrance, Chen's keycard still somehow functional after all these years. Inside, the corridors were stark and sterile, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that flickered ominously. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, and Sarah could hear the sound of heavy machinery, industrial shredders, she guessed, destroying decades of research. The data core was 3 levels down, protected behind multiple security doors that Chen bypassed with a combination of old access codes and newer hacking techniques. Sarah marveled at how quickly the elderly scientist moved, his fingers dancing across keypads and terminals with practiced efficiency. "Here," he said, stopping before a massive server array that hummed with electronic life. "This contains everything. The original experiments, the genetic modifications, the long-term effects we've been monitoring. It's all here." Sarah pulled out the portable drive Marcus had given her, a military-grade device capable of storing terabytes of data. As the download began, she noticed Chen staring at one of the monitors, his face growing pale. "What is it?" she asked. "The birth records," he whispered. "Sarah, you need to see this." On the screen was a list of names, dates, and genetic markers. Sarah scanned the entries, not understanding what she was looking at until she saw it. Her own name, her birth date, and a string of alphanumeric codes that made her blood run cold. "You're not just carrying the truth," Chen said quietly. "You are the truth. You're one of them, Sarah. One of the enhanced." The download completed just as explosions rocked the building above them, dust cascading from the ceiling as Blackwood's forces closed in. The safe house felt more like a tomb than sanctuary. Sarah pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, one hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly as Marcus paced the small room like a caged animal. The weight of the flash drive in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. "They'll find us," Marcus muttered, running his hands through his hair. "Henderson has resources we can't even imagine. Military connections, black budget funding." "Stop!" Sarah's voice cut through his spiral. "We knew this would happen. We have the evidence, all of it, the genetic modification protocols, the test subjects, the cover-up spanning 30 years. The single bare bulb overhead flickered, casting dancing shadows across the maps and documents they'd spread on the rickety table. Photos of Millbrook's residents stared back at them. Men, women, and children who had no idea they were part of humanity's most ambitious and terrifying experiment. Sarah's phone buzzed. "Unknown number." "Don't answer it," Marcus warned, but she was already swiping. "Dr. Chen." The voice was unmistakably Henderson's, smooth and cold as winter steel. "I believe you have something that belongs to the United States government." "I have evidence of crimes against humanity," Sarah replied, activating the speaker. "Unauthorized human experimentation, murder, conspiracy. You have classified research that could revolutionize human evolution. The ability to adapt to any environment, to survive climate change, to expand beyond this dying planet. And you want to destroy it because of misplaced moral outrage." Marcus was already moving, gathering their materials. They'd stayed too long. If Henderson was calling, it meant his people were close. "Those people in Millbrook aren't volunteers," Sarah said, shoving documents into her bag. "They're prisoners. Their children are being born with genetic modifications they never consented to. Their children are the future of our species." Henderson's voice carried the fervor of a true believer. "In 50 years, when coastal cities are underwater and the atmosphere is toxic, those children will inherit the earth. We gave them the greatest gift imaginable, survival." The sound of vehicles outside made Marcus freeze, multiple engines moving fast. "It's too late to run," Henderson continued, as if reading their minds. "My men have the building surrounded, but I'm willing to make you an offer, Dr. Chen. Join us. Your background in geology, combined with your unique condition, makes you invaluable to our research." Sarah's blood went cold. "My condition? Did you really think it was coincidence that brought you to Millbrook? We've been monitoring you since your first trimester. The environmental exposures during your fieldwork, the specific geological formations you've studied, they've created the perfect conditions for our next phase of testing." Her hand flew to her stomach, the morning sickness that never quite went away, the strange cravings, the way her body seemed to be adapting to stress in ways that defied medical explanation. "You're lying," she whispered. "Your child is already showing remarkable adaptations, Dr. Chen. Enhanced neural development, improved metabolic efficiency. She's going to be extraordinary." Marcus grabbed her arm. "We move now," he hissed. "Back exit." But as they reached the rear door, it burst open. 3 figures in tactical gear flooded in, weapons raised. Sarah recognized the lead operative, Thompson, Henderson's right hand from Millbrook. "Hands where we can see them," Thompson barked. Sarah raised her hands slowly, the flash drive still hidden in her palm. "You can't cover this up forever. People know I'm missing. Other scientists will ask questions. Other scientists will receive a tragic report about a pregnant geologist who suffered a mental breakdown." Henderson's voice crackled through Thompson's radio. "Stress-induced delusions about government conspiracies." "Very sad, very believable." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Sarah. "There are copies of the data, multiple locations." Thompson's smile was predatory. "We know about the storage unit in Denver, and your friend at the university, and the journalist in Washington. We've been 3 steps ahead of you since you left Millbrook." Sarah felt the walls of the safe house closing in, but her mind was racing. Something Henderson had said earlier about her geological work, the specific formations she'd studied, the rare earth elements, the unusual mineral compositions she'd been tracking for years. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. Her research hadn't just led her to Millbrook by accident. The government had been using her work to identify locations with the specific environmental conditions needed for their experiments. She hadn't just stumbled upon their secret, she'd been helping them build it. "The mineral surveys," she breathed. "You've been using my research to find new sites." Thompson's radio crackled again. Henderson's voice carried a note of approval. "Very good, Dr. Chen. Now you're beginning to understand the scope of what we've built." Millbrook was just the beginning. The flash drive felt impossibly small in Sarah's palm as she realized the true horror of her situation. She wasn't just carrying evidence of one experiment. She was carrying the blueprint for dozens more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty lot where Millbrook had stood just 12 hours before. Sarah pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement within as she stared at the impossible sight where an entire town had thrived. Streets, houses, the laboratory, hundreds of people, now only prairie grass swayed in the wind. "The neural mapping was never the real experiment," Dr. Chen said quietly beside her. She looked older now, her face etched with the weight of decades-old secrets. "Millbrook itself was. We were studying something far more profound than enhanced intelligence." Sarah turned to face her, Marcus standing protectively at her other side. Agent Williams and his team had withdrawn to their vehicles, speaking in hushed tones into their radios. "The cleanup had begun, but what did you clean up when an entire town simply vanished? The children born here weren't just smarter. Chen continued. They existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously present and absent until observed and measured by the outside world. Your pregnancy, Sarah, your connection to this place, it anchored them, made them real. The words should have sounded insane, but after everything Sarah had witnessed, they felt like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. That's why I could find the town when others couldn't. Why my GPS led me here when there was nothing on the maps. Your unborn child shares their quantum signature. You became the observer that collapsed their probability wave into reality. Chen reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device, its surface shimmering like oil on water. This contains the complete research data, not just the neural enhancement protocols, but the quantum consciousness studies. Everything we learned about the nature of human perception and reality itself. Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight with anger. You're talking about people's lives like they're lab rats. Those families, those children, what happened to them? They returned to their natural state, Chen said simply, existing in quantum flux until the next observer collapses their wave function. They're not gone exactly, they're just elsewhere, elsewhen. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the magnitude of it hit her. Tommy, the boy I met, all those families trying to live normal lives in this impossible place, they're trapped in some kind of limbo? Not trapped, liberated. They exist outside the normal constraints of space-time, experiencing all possible realities simultaneously. It's a form of consciousness we can barely comprehend. Chen's voice carried a mixture of awe and regret, but the government wanted to weaponize it, turn it into a tool for intelligence gathering and surveillance. That's when I destroyed the research and went into hiding. Agent Williams approached, his expression grim. Dr. Carter, we need to discuss your situation. What you've seen here is classified at the highest levels. There are protocols. The protocols died with Director Morrison, Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. Along with any obligation I have to keep quiet about experiments on human subjects. The research can't be made public, Williams insisted. The implications for national security are nothing compared to the implications for human dignity, Marcus interrupted. These weren't enemy combatants or volunteers, they were families. Children who had their very existence turned into a government science project. Sarah looked at the device in Dr. Chen's hand, understanding the weight of the choice before her. The data it contained could revolutionize science, medicine, and humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. But it could also lead to more experiments, more invisible towns filled with people caught between existence and oblivion. There's something else, Chen said quietly. Your child will carry the quantum signature. As they grow, they'll have the ability to perceive and interact with quantum-shifted realities. They'll be able to find Millbrook again, to communicate with its inhabitants. The baby moved within her, and Sarah gasped as images flashed through her mind, glimpses of the town existing in shimmering translucence, Tommy waving from a window that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, families going about their lives in the spaces between reality. They're okay, she whispered, wonder filling her voice. Different, but okay. Chen nodded. Your child will be their bridge to our reality. The question is, what will you do with that responsibility? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision. When she opened them, her gaze was steady, resolved. I'll protect them, all of them, the families in quantum flux and my child who can reach them, and I'll make sure this research is used to help people, not exploit them. She took the device from Chen's outstretched hand, its surface warm against her palm. But I won't do it alone. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. You won't have to. As they walked away from the empty lot, Sarah felt the ghost of Millbrook shimmering at the edges of her perception, its quantum shadows following her toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Behind them, Agent Williams barked orders into his radio, but Sarah knew the real power had already changed hands. The truth would find a way.